Niamh Campbell, you're very welcome to this episode of the Script to Story podcast series. And Niamh, I'm so excited to talk to you because you were awarded the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature in 2021. And that's the big prize here. And I want to know how you managed to do that, how you managed so young to achieve so much at such an early stage of your career. Tell us all about it.
Thank you so much. Well, I am, I suppose, still relatively young, or was still relatively young, but for me it feels a little bit late because I was always writing when I was a child and a teenager, and then in my 20s I more or less stopped. And the reason is really that I went to college and studied English, and then I ended up doing a PhD in London, partly because the crash happened. I graduated in 2010 and I couldn't get a job, so I just started thinking I'd stay in college, and I did. And I didn't do any creative writing for years and years. It's just completely stopped. I didn't even really notice because I was doing scholarship, I was writing about other writers. And I came back after that to Ireland, and I still couldn't really get meaningful work. I was, post PhD, very much at a loose end, very much a kind of what will I do with my life? I went for a very strange dark night of the soul where I put a lot of energy into a career that didn't seem to be working out. So I thought, what did I ever want to do to begin with? And it was like, just write. So I did a decision that I would do that. And at the time, the Arts Council of Ireland had just opened bursaries called the Next Generation Bursary. And this was the first year they ran this. And to get this bursary, you didn't have to have actually published anything. It was meant to be for someone at the early stages. So I sent them what I had, and I explained that, I'd done a PhD and so on. And I said to myself that if I got that money, I would quit the job I was doing at the time, which was I was working as a clerical officer, and I would go and write for a year. And I did. So I did. And once you have done something like quit a job to write, now I was at this point, I was 27, so I hadn't like much to lose. So I'm not saying everybody should quit their job and write, but once you've done something like that, I had 12 months to make this fly, or I just walked out of a pensionable permanent job.
Nothing.
So I think the motivation, I was pretty strict. I used to put posters up on the wall with like who I had submitted a story to, had I heard back from them, what date was this opening, what date was that opening. And I started volunteering at the Irish Writers Centre. I used to go down and pour wine at events so that I could kind of be around writers and remind myself.
So I was pretty focused. You wanted this more than
I wanted it. Yeah. And that was like 12 months of straight doing this. And then ultimately, one of the short pieces I published in the Dublin Review, the editor got in touch with me and asked me, did I have a longer project? And he started reading what became This Happy and doing the back and forth. So I got kind of free editorial input early from someone who was very interested and very good, but who I didn't end up going with. Then one day I went down to the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, chatting to a writer, and I said, who represents you? And she told me, an agent in London. And so I went upstairs and emailed my manuscript to this agent. And this agent never answered me, but his assistant answered me and said, I'm branching out to be an agent in the next couple of months. I would like to perhaps sign you. And then that was just it. It went from there. So it was a series of lucky encounters and little moments. But I probably would say I was fortunate enough when I had that bursary that I just had a very serious focus on making it work. I had to be both. And that on a practical level is about letting yourself write every day, writing whatever you want, writing the book you really want to write. As they always say, that's very corny, but it's very true, to stay interested. And it was a very indulgent year. So before I was published, I didn't worry about audience. I had no sense of people reading, and I really just did whatever I wanted. So I got into the rhythm as well of being quite autonomous creatively, I think, as well. But I always had my eye on, how does one actually publish writing? Like who do you go to? And, I just was looking at journals, and I was submitting to journals. And then when you get feedback from journals, even if you're rejected, you start to get a sense of if they're criticizing the same thing, then it's the thing you're doing wrong. And then you take that on board. But it was, there was a particular nexus of events. So funnily enough, I probably wouldn't have a career if I'd actually gotten a good job.
That's a good thing for other people to know. And I always think that when you get a rejection letter, never take it too seriously, because if you're really determined and you're flexible in terms of if you're willing to change and adapt and become better every day, then don't give up on your dream. I think that sometimes great writers are lost because they are afraid of a rejection letter.
I find that odd, because once you've gotten a couple of them, they become such a part of life, you don't really care anymore. I mean, I still get rejected.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
people
got
need to learn
rejected a couple of months ago by a magazine, an article, a journal in Ireland. I sent them something and they said it's not
Oh
finished.
my goodness. Oh
So it's
my
evidence to
goodness. Do they
everybody.
not
It
know who
never
you are?
stops. She said
Did you
that,
tell them who
like,
you are?
this sense of like, I was really happy to see your name in the inbox. Thank you, da da da. I'm really sorry, but and they were right. It wasn't, their criticisms were completely correct.
And
But
we're in our
still get
podcast
rejected.
series, we're talking about the words we use and how authors can really be at the forefront of change. And if we look back at books such as, we say, if you even take the author Enid Blyton and you look back at her work today, her biases would be quite prejudiced. She'd be quite
They'd be
prejudiced
quite,
in her writing, because we have changed, society has changed. And I think authors have an opportunity to push the boundaries. What do you think?
Oh, I do think it's probably very true for themes, perhaps. I think we're at a moment writing now where maybe political issues or social justice issues are quite current in literature. They do pop up a lot. They are there. Literature is kind of seen as this space for discussing this. So you have an opportunity to put these themes front and center. But what makes fiction writing particularly interesting for me in this is that what fiction does is show the most nuanced possible version of the story. So what it's bringing is that if you're changing, if you're pushing towards sort of a social progressive change, or even just deepening understanding of people and scenarios, it's done through being really nuanced. So I don't think fiction, it shouldn't just be restaging the same moral arguments without really examining them. It goes in deeper, and in that way it sometimes goes in darker too. But I think about it, I would think it's the subject matter or this perspective or the honesty that you can put across in fiction about life that is potentially, could be seen as ushering in change or encouraging a change of perspective, maybe.
And I also, the one thing that I love about fiction is it's so kind of close to reality that it can really open up the mind. It can be cathartic for the reader. It can open up the mind and open up the emotions to the possibility of what if, because it's so close to that reality. Even though it's fiction, it's so close to that reality that it can open up the reader's mind to something else. And that's where the power of words come in, I think, and the beauty of writing.
The absolute accuracy sometimes, if words can reveal very, very accurately a state of mind, and the reader thinks they've known that state of mind so many times, but they've never described it. There's that amazing moment of solidarity. I think you feel less lonely in the world when you see these described. And that I've always found that in writing to be really helpful for me. So it's what I'm trying to do a lot of the time on my own, is when I have a complicated state of mind, I'll try very hard to explain this as precisely as I can, which means I'll have to think into it. And that's very important to me.
Actually, now that we're on the topic of this, is it necessary for an author to be insightful? Is it necessary for them to have that deep connection with themselves in order to produce great work?
I think it is. And also they need to be insightful about others. So it really begins with you, but I mean, it's a life's work figuring out your own motivations as a person, because I think the subconscious is in the driving seat of most people's lives. And I always think that the great struggle you have is trying to figure out the scripts going on behind the scenes with you. And then the more you understand that, the more you understand other people. And on a strategic level, if you're developing characters, you need to make them have motivations and seem to be well-rounded. You've got to understand where they're coming from as well. So I think insight might be the most important thing. Insight and an ability to absorb, to learn from language as much as possible, always as you go. So it's like a combination of great insight, as much as you can gain, and a facility with the medium, with the words. These are probably the most important things.
Isn't it funny? I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she sent me this. She told me the story first, and then she said, I have to send you the picture. So her 5-year-old daughter came running into the kitchen, and she had loads of an A4 pad, but loads of sheets of paper had been pulled out of it, and they're on top and they're everywhere. And she ran over to the table, and this was like 20 to 9, and they had to go to school. And she said, what are you doing? She said, "Ma'am, I'm writing the story of my life."
My life before school.
At 5 years of age.
Oh God. And what, I'm wanting to read that now. What did it
Yeah,
say?
I said, I can't wait to read this one. So she
Yeah.
said, if I write a piece every day for the rest of my life, it's going to be this big, you know? And it was quite funny because her mom sent it and she drew beautiful pictures and she wrote on it Keelan's life. And I thought at 5 years of age, if she has that depth to her at 5 years of age, what's she going to be like at 25?
She's probably going to be a writer.
It was amazing to see, but the insight she had to think, my life.
This is a narrative that's happening. Yeah, this is actually happening in a linear way, and I need to get a hold of it. That's very wise. And
yeah, I thought it was quite unusual to see it happening, and it was great because I said, nurture that now. Keep her going. She wants to keep writing, let her
and keep
writing.
what she's doing. Don't let her throw them away.
Oh, I told her not to. I told her I would murder her if she did that. Because it's so important to have these things to even look back on, because if she at 25, 26, 27 gets that rejection letter and her mom said, well, it takes out this, you were born to write. And not everybody is born to write. And I'm glad that the circumstances of your life and the risks you took brought you to this point.
I've been a mix of lucky and reckless. And I think it's probably, I was also young. I do think the older I get, the more I realized that this was something that I could do in my 20s with relative ease, because I was living in a house share and I had a bike and a laptop, that was it really. It gets harder. So, and if I hadn't have had those gaps in my career where I wasn't doing anything else, it's kind of funny how it fell. But then also, once you've done one courageous thing and everyone tries to stop you doing it, then they just kind of stop trying and they just let you do whatever you want. And you do kind of end up getting, potentially having everything fall into place, which is, I have been very fortunate in that as well, because then I needed to sell it, of course. And, once I finished the book, I had to sell it. So that was the next level of the struggle. And, I was lucky.
Yeah, that is a struggle. That is the piece that there are a lot of people who write something wonderful and leave it in the drawer for 40 years. Do you know what I mean? And never touch it. And always
much better
wonder,
to start.
And always wonder why, what if. It's wonderful to hear that you had the courage to keep going. You had the determination to keep going. And you lecture in University of Maynooth, University.
Yes, I very recently, as of the last month, transitioned from Maynooth to UCD. So I'm kind of running between one place and the other, but I lecture at UCD now. But I was at Maynooth for a good few years. I did my postdoc there, and I kind of stayed on doing tutoring and stuff. So it was like a little part-time job I had for quite a while, was tutoring while I was writing the second book. So that was also a balancing act.
With the students and that you were tutoring and the other students you're lecturing, and are you seeing positive things when it comes to the writing of the future, if it comes to the Ireland, the literature in Ireland? Are you seeing?
I see a mix of the relationship with literacy being different.
Okay.
And maybe there's a lot of text produced in their lives that wasn't the case for me. So they're writing internet things, they're playing very densely narrative-based video games, they read things that are more casual, like young adult fiction series. There's quite a lot of that around now that wasn't around when I was younger, and less literacy with maybe literature. So, and then there are the students who are reading literature voraciously because they want to be writers. So I think the casual ambient world that they're living in is both full of language, but not quite formal.
Well, because I have a book publisher, we do data research, and the children's book industry is quite stable, and people who up to 19 years is quite stable, and then 70 plus is very stable. But there's a real drop of 35% in readership between 20 and 49 years of age.
Interesting. It's sad.
And at that same time, there's an increase in internet minutes in that.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Now I am within that age group, feeding into that data in a really bad way. I mean, I'm a writer and I spend too much time on the internet and I don't read enough. It's a concentration thing. But I think it's interesting because that age group are working, and it is probably their degree of mental fatigue
I think so.
and ease of access to scrolling on a smartphone, which does usually require less effort on your behalf than reading a novel does.
And it's strange too, because they noticed that like that transfer, that 35% drop, that is correlation with an increase in use of Netflix and watching films.
I'm covering my face in horror. I'm also partaking of this, but I'm gonna say people are tired, and that is. Let me see, where does reading come into this when you're maybe looking at a screen, using your eyes as well? So much work is based around using the eyes and straining the eyes. I think that's got to do with it, that it can be difficult to look at words.
And I think that because of this, you see certain governments are really, because we monitor what's happening, in Europe. So certain governments are really trying to counteract this. German government in particular trying to counteract this. And I think that it's possibly something that the Irish government could look at as well, because how do you keep an industry alive if people are transferring over to the internet? Because those that will age now, they're 20 to 49, they will eventually be 70. And is it going to continue then down the time? Yeah.
What's interesting is that there's a moral case for this that's very important as well, because say television, which of course we all enjoy, is very subject to, it's very expensive. So it's subject to market logic quite a lot, and it needs to make money, and panels will decide what's going to do well based on what did well before. And the kind of stuff that's being produced won't necessarily be very risky. It might seem risky, but it won't be. But literature, and especially literature that's written before, even the 21st century, is not subject to any of those requirements. So there's a sense that literature is sort of more politically free. And if you're looking for sort of empathy and complexity and to engage with an accessible art form from a civic perspective or from an ethical perspective, I think writing is freer to be more authentic in that regard than commercial television is going to be.
Think so. Yeah, I think so.
Sometimes the argument that comes back is like, well, it's about enjoyment, but that's where it's actually with my students. We have this conversation where I say, why do you think that literature should be consumed like a product? Because that's not what it's designed for at all. It's designed to be totally different. And once they realize that, they do respond kind of more interested kind of way, that they don't see books that are difficult perhaps or odd or old or anachronistic as being failed entertainment products. They see them as this other thing, and maybe it restores some of the proper oddness of art.
And I think that's the language we need to use going forward in order to help people to, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just keep it as part of your life. You never know, you might just creep back into a love affair with literature if you've fallen out of it. So if we keep the language, I suppose, of the words we use, instruct or just tell people, well, we're not trying really to entertain, we're trying to we're doing something different. We want
and much more worthwhile, more memorable. I mean, there's a place for both kind of, being entertained. And then you see, the thing about the novel, especially the novel, is that it is this famously always this forum where high art reaches everybody. You just have to know how to read. You don't need access. You don't need to travel. You don't really need much money. It's the most democratic form of art. So it gets like progressive, strange, radical thoughts into the hands of people all over. And so it is quite subversive as well. But in order for you to have that experience, you can't imagine that it's going to be a passive entertainment experience every time.
No,
it isn't.
Without a doubt.
So a lot of teaching literature and teaching writing is kind of pushing that understanding back into play, that this is just because it's everywhere and it's cheap and you can pick it up, doesn't mean it is an art, like it is a form of art. And that kind of has a lot of potential there that is complicated, but it's worth it.
Well, it definitely is worth it. And Niamh Campbell, thank you very much for being part of this episode of the Script to Story podcast series. We hope to see you maybe sometime in the future again.
Thanks for having me, Marguerite.
Thanks very much.